Alright, so welcome back to the Fast Forward Sailing YouTube channel. In this video we're going to be going over all the key moments from SailGP Taranto. It was a dramatic day of racing despite the light winds. Lots to talk about. I'm going to be going through the racing, picking out the key moments and giving you my thoughts. I'm going to save my analysis of the overall event for another video, so if you don't want to miss that, press the subscribe button and then you'll see an alerts bell. And if you click the alerts bell, YouTube will send you notifications each time I release a new video. Right, so here is the leaderboard after day one of racing. We have Jimmy Spittle and Nathan Outridge on top. A complete flip of the table from last time in Bermuda. It seems those two are inseparable. Phil Robertson and Spain also doing a good job to get into that top three. With SailGP though, things can always change around on the second day, as we saw last time, with all of these teams potentially having a shot at the final three. So here we are at the start of race one. Now New Zealand are far closer to the start line here with 22 seconds to go, which is often a vulnerable spot, especially as they'll have to control their speed more than the boats behind them. And as we saw yesterday, it's really important to be on the line with speed, especially in these light winds. However, what New Zealand has spotted before this first start is that the wind had died down, so it was going to be hard for these guys to get up and foiling quickly, and therefore hard to judge their time on distance to the line. So often in sailboat racing, if it is very light winds or the wind is very up and down, it can pay to stay close to the start line. So let's see how this start went down.
Where Goodison has got the British boat. Outrage on Japan though. Good control. Opportunity to shut the French out at the top of the line here. And now can Slingsby get through? The Spanish...
Now we see France trying to come across here on top. They are positioning themselves for a really good start. But New Zealand, being the lured boat, have rights to force France to get out of their way and force them beyond this mark, as we'll see here.
They're out the back. They're behind off this start line, but it looks to me like Besson. He's trickling in. Has he timed it right at this top end of the line? Will there be a gap? Could be disaster for the French. No!
So aggressive tactics there from New Zealand, but they really needed to do that because France had more speed and would have shot over the top of them. So now France aren't able to go through the start line, and that really puts them down the fleet.
No room. Green there. Clear start. And New Zealand, Sarafagis, wow, he was so aggressive. Here go the New Zealand crew.
Now New Zealand, by doing that, also puts themselves in a position to give the boats following them dirty wind. So once they get up foiling, they can build up a pretty impressive lead, which makes this race a lot easier for them.
Wow, what a lockout job there by the Kiwis. Shut the door on the French. We thought they were early. They were perfectly on time. Everyone else was late. What are you looking at now, Stevie, for the Kiwis going into Mark 1?
It's really dropped off this wind, Fred. We're hearing now, that's Maloney. He's talking about lifting the boat out of the water. They're trying to...
So all these boats struggling to even get 2 holes out of the water. We see New Zealand a moment ago, they had their windward hull out of the water, which is faster than having both holes in. A lot of the old foiling boats, which Sarafagis New Zealand helm was experienced in racing, they often only flew 1 hole, and perhaps that's why New Zealand are outperforming the others here. Also, we have to remember that Sarafagis grew up in the Swiss lakes, and being an inland sailor myself, I know what an advantage that is when there's light and patchy winds like there was today.
Speed here, Fred. It's really hard.
This is the umpires. Penalty us.
The umpire's trying to figure out.
Penalty Japan, relative Australia.
Right, so a penalty for Japan there. Let's have a look back and see what happened. So here's Japan here, Australia just below them. So potentially Japan have received this penalty because Australia were trying to force them up, just like New Zealand did to France, but Japan forced their way in there, which they're not legally entitled to do.
Here go the New Zealand.
So it looks very tight there. It looks like there was maybe a slight luff from Australia to try and force Japan to go the other side, but Japan push in. Right, so skipping ahead a bit to the next leg, New Zealand here got a big lead, but they're just about to make things a bit harder for themselves. Right, so New Zealand here just about to go into a jibe.
And they're jibing here for a right turn. We've seen better pressure on the right-hand side, but I think there was a huge shift on that.
Now just coming out of this jibe, they just skyrocket up. And as we know, if you go too high on the foils, then you're going to come down with a big splash. So that's why it's really important to keep the flight of the boats at an equal height.
Oh, they get a bit high in the jibe there. They've flown the boat too high. They're off the foils. This is going to cost them a lot of distance.
So just a mistake like that, which I believe was just a mistake or an equipment error with one of the foils. This mistake really set them back because it took them off their foils, and the boats are so much slower when they got the drag of their two hulls in the water.
In the water, bad manoeuvre for this inexperienced crew. That's going to be costly. And Slingsby, that's more where we're used to seeing him. But the battle in the back of the pack, this is going to be closing up.
So Australia, after a bad day yesterday, are doing well in second at this stage and gaining well on New Zealand here.
The Kiwi crew as they approach gate number 2.
That looked like a rudder lift problem for me there. Not only do we fly off the main foils, but you fly off the T-foils on the back, the rudders that steer the boat, and they just weren't getting the lift of the boat, the back of the boat, to keep the boat in the air.
Interesting commentary from Freddie Carr there. I see no reason to disagree with his analysis.
So here comes Australia sitting in second place, the USA sitting in third. Remember, the USA and Japan are leading right now with 21 points each. So, guys, if the USA has a top 3 finish, they've all but secured a...
So Australia are able to come round with speed here. Man, they've really closed the gap on New Zealand.
Place for Tom Slingsby, where he really needs to win this race and see France and Spain at the back of the fleet to give himself a chance of making the final. It's very, very unlikely Australia could make it, but this is perhaps his best chance with Besson and Robertson at the back of the pack.
So yeah, I believe Australia needs to win both of the races today and have other results go their way to make the final. But it's always a bit confusing on those mathematics. So it's possible they could have had a few seconds in there and still made it through. So here we see Australia. They ran at the same mark, but they've quickly overtaken New Zealand. So even if you have the same route into the mark as the boat ahead of you, you can still overtake if you're going faster.
He's right now flying the hole after splashing down with both into the water coming off the foils. Their lead is dropping quickly.
Right, so here's a replay of New Zealand's jibe. Keep an eye out on this back rudder because this pops out, and I think that's the cause of the problem. Yeah, so if you just saw there, it just came up a bit too high, causing the front of the boat to jump up out of the water and leading to the inevitable slow down when they come down to earth, or should I say water. Right, so here we are at the top of the first beat. Australia got a bit of a lead here, having to go way beyond the ley lines so that when they tack they can bear off, and bearing off gets that speed up so they can get back foiling. Once they're foiling, then they can start heading up closer to the wind. But that's why they can't really tack on these ley lines here, because these boats can only really sail these angles in the stronger winds.
The USA and Japan would book their place in the final race, the final 3 shootout. Spanish would still be in third, but if it finishes like it is now, New Zealand would only be 2 points behind the Spanish going into race 5. So as I said, the USA and Japan would qualify, and that third spot would still be wide open. Tight.
So we see here slow tack from Australia. That's probably just a result of the light winds. But if you look at their angle here, it's far off the angle of the ley line, and that's why they needed to go further. But New Zealand crossing ahead here is all going to be down to whether they can pull off the foiling tack. Going into attack, they're almost double the speed, so keeping the boat on the foils is essential.
Coming up here, the Kiwis going to surely look to take the wind of the Australians. There you go, tack from Sarafagis. He's new to the SailGP circuit, but great move from Switzerland.
Right, nice tack on Team New Zealand there. Coming out of the tack, they're almost the same speed as Australia, and Australia have been going for a while, and they put themselves in a position to give Australia dirty wind, which if you're a non-sailor, this graphic demonstrates it. Basically, if you're behind another boat, you're receiving their disturbed wind after it's already passed through their sail.
32, world champion, but what I think most important here, Todd, he's a real light wind specialist. This is old school cat sailing here. Hulls in the water, you've got to adapt to the situation. The wind wash he put onto Australia there, slow him down, and it's Jimmy Spithill charging in. We saw that a lot yesterday. Has he made the right call here?
So Spithill drops in, currently sitting in.
Right, so a nice catch up here from Spithill and Team USA. New Zealand, they just did a little bear away after their attack here. That's allowed them to get up their speed, so they're the fastest boat here. You might think they're going to be heading towards this mark because it's the closest, but as we'll see, they all head towards the mark further away. They can choose which of these to go around. They choose to go for this one because in the lighter winds, it's risky coming around here because although it's closer, you'll probably come off your foils and you're going to really slow down. So it just pays to go that extra distance. Australia, they're behind at this stage. So as we'll see, they come in, they tack around here to give themselves a split. I think that was a good call tactically from Australia, but as we'll see, strategically, it wasn't such a good call. Tactically, you're getting out of the wing wash from New Zealand and the disturbed wake. You're getting out of that earlier by tacking off here rather than carrying on. But as we see, going out on this left side, looking downwind, does not pay for Australia, presumably because there is less wind.
Nice move there by Saraphagus. He stayed clear, kept it clean, and he's got himself back up on the foil there. Bit of wing wash going onto Spithill. He'll hate that. And Slingsby, well, he's decided to try and find wind on the other side of the...
So just pausing here, look how much Australia have slowed down in that tack. This is why these two decided to sail the extra distance. And look at New Zealand nearly going 4 times the speed of Australia.
Great opportunity at these gates for the teams to be tactical. They've got a chance to spot more wind, and here we go, Saraphagus flying.
It's not lost on me that Saraphagus, the Swiss helmsman on board the Kiwi boat.
Right, here we are at the other end of the leg, and we see Australia really lost out here. Japan have come back into it. They were down in 5th after their penalty at the start, so a really decent comeback by Japan, who really showed the most consistency of any team today and yesterday, finishing in the top 3 in every race.
Look at that in the background, Nathan Outridge in Japan. He's sniffing back into this race, renowned in the light winds for finding the wind, and he's not going away anywhere. Looks like all the boats will take a right turn at the bottom here, trying to set up. JK we heard there, get ready for a quick manoeuvre around the mark here.
So New Zealand keeping their lead over the USA here. If you can keep your lead around the leeward mark, then you have your competitors behind you, which means they will get your dirty air off your wing, or they'll have to tack off. And as we know, tacking in these light winds can be costly because you lose so much speed. So we've heard one of the teams, I'm not sure which one, mentioning a JK manoeuvre, which for those of you who don't know is when they come round this mark and put it straight into attack to split off towards this side. While we're on the topic, I should mention that Nathan Outridge on Team Japan seems to be the expert of this manoeuvre, and we saw them pulling it off several times today and yesterday.
Saraphagus, there's so much communication required on these boats because everyone's having to work really...
Right, so it looks like the US couldn't go straight into the attack here. It looked like they were trying to, but then they saw Australia, so they had to bear off again. Interestingly, Australia almost were able to make this mark, and they could have kept in the race at this point, but the wind just shifted, which meant their lay lines shifted, and so they couldn't quite lay this mark in one, and so they had to jibe off, which will really slow them down.
Together, Spithill follows him around, and it's Australia. He didn't quite make the mark. An extra manoeuvre for Slingsby, sorry there. That's going to be costly. Could give Outridge a chance to move past him in the race. You see the Australian boat trying to get back on the foils. It's so costly when you fall off the foils in this.
So because Australia weren't able to make it round here, they knew that rather than doing the double jibe, they had no choice but to painfully go all the way to this other gate mark. So sailing a lot of extra distance, letting Japan past. The only advantage here that Australia potentially have is creating a split between them and the other boats. So if there's more wind over here on this leg, they'll make a gain. But as we saw on the downwind, they lost out by going on this side, and as we'll see in the next upwind, they lose out again. A good rule of thumb when sailing is if one side is better than the other on the downwind, that side will usually also be better on the upwind.
So everyone heading to the top of the course, that left side, trying to forward more breeze. Tom Slingsby rolls the dice. We'll see if it comes up. And there's the JK coming from Nathan Outridge and Japan SailGP. So now you got 4 races battling for that top position.
So there we see Japan doing another JK maneuver. Interestingly, Australia, even though they had to sail all this extra distance, they are still keeping the speed up at this stage. And because they've been able to sail all this distance on a reach, which is the easiest point of sailing to get the boats up foiling, that's allowed them to not be too hurt at this stage by coming out to this gate mark. However, they are heading over to the lighter side, which doesn't work out too well for them.
JK coming from Nathan Outridge and Japan SailGP. So now you've got 4 races battling for that top position here in race number 4, with race 5 still to come.
And going into race 5, I'm looking at the overall leaderboard and what this means. As it stands in this race, if they finish as they are, the USA and the Japanese would qualify for the final 3 shootout. As it stands going into the final race, New Zealand...
So as we see here, Australia really slowing down, even though they haven't done attack yet, and we see much higher speeds out on this left side.
And Spain would be tied on 19 points, with the Brits just 5 points behind on 14.
Right, so this is the last leg of race 1, and we see here New Zealand have built out a nice lead over the USA in 2nd place. Australia painfully have dropped down to 6th. Taranto really hasn't been Australia's event.
Arno Sarafagis to bring home New Zealand's first race win in SailGP.
And we talked about it from the get-go. The start's so key, not having a penalty to get things going, and Sarafagis put himself in a great spot, and he stuffed the French off the corner. They were unable to get into that small gap, and now they sit in 8th, and the Kiwis are sailing their first win of the season here in SailGP. Congratulations to Arno Sarafagis and the crew of New Zealand SailGP as they will take the win in race number 4 and picking up all 8 points.
So nice first win there for New Zealand. As we heard, that's their first ever win in SailGP, and I expect a first of many to come.
Pretty key word in sport. Points behind those Australian crew. Well, it's been a very, very tough week sailing for
Australia catch back up to 5th. The Brits in 6th. That seems to be their default position this event. It's not been an embarrassing first event for Paul Goodison as helm of the UK team. We have to remember that this is his first event in SailGP in what is a very impressive fleet. So I wouldn't write off the Brits for the next event, especially considering they're going to be on home waters.
in this last race. Don't be at all surprised to see him coming out swinging. Paul Goodison.